Welcome once again to the offices of the Game Detectives.
After traveling the world in search of clues and hunting down the best games, we are finally back for another season.
And today, we're cracking the case on Yooka Laylee.
But before we get into the analysis of Yooka Laylee, we're going to take a little look at the history of the title. Here are the cold, hard facts. The journey of Yooka Laylee all starts with Microsoft's acquisition of Rare in late 2002. Nintendo owned the majority of Rare stock at that time, but had decided to not fully buy the company due to a dispute over the game called Dinosaur Planet, which eventually turned into Star Fox Adventures. So thanks for that one, Miyamoto. Rare decided to look for other offers in the market. After a failed deal with Activision, Rare decided to go with Microsoft, and was bought for $375 million.
However, the transition from Nintendo to Microsoft was anything but smooth. During the transition, 30 employees decided to leave Rare and find another job rather than work for that company. Then, after a string of commercial and critical failures, like Grabbed by the Ghoulies, Conquer Live and Reloaded, and the game that shall not be named, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, Microsoft decided to focus Rare on Kinect games, rather than traditional platformers that they had been known to make.
During Rare's time at Microsoft, many of the original employees of the company left, and a group of these employees eventually banded together in 2015 to announce a new company called Playtonic. Playtonic's first game was to be Yooka Laylee, which they claimed was a, quote, spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie, one of Rare's most popular games. Playtonic's Kickstarter campaign for Yooka Laylee was one of the most successful in gaming history, and expectations were running high both for the game and the company as a whole.
In fact, David and I both contributed to the Yooka Laylee Kickstarter. I'm still waiting for that t-shirt, Playtonic, hoping for the successful return of the 3D platformer. However, when Playtonic delayed the game multiple times, and other huge Kickstarter games like Mighty No. 9 started bombing, we were skeptical of the eventual quality of Yooka Laylee.
And while Yooka Laylee is not quite the
anime fan on prom night
that Mighty No. 9 was, it still disappoints in many areas. The game brings some well-needed innovations and updates the 3D platformer, but it still sticks too much to the past, and its frequent references to Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong 64. Overall, Playtonic's Yooka Laylee succeeds in establishing Playtonic as a gaming company, since the game fundamentally works and attempts to bring something new to the genre, but it also lacks the polish and finesse that made Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie stick out from the rest of the platformers in the N64 era. Even worse, the game openly welcomes references to these past games, which makes the flaws in Yooka Laylee even more noticeable. I actually found myself wanting to ditch Yooka Laylee to play previous Rare titles. That's never a good thing.
But Yooka Laylee does bring a much-needed update to the genre, and first does so by limiting the sheer number of collectibles that a player can collect. For example, in Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie, you had to collect various types of eggs in order to use them. In Yooka Laylee, this system is streamlined by giving Yooka a move called the Slurp Shot that allows him to eat various types of berries and then shoot them for a limited amount of time. The developers then place these berry bushes in spots where they are needed. This eliminates yet another collectible that the player needs to keep track of. Although, in keeping with Banjo-Tooie, the first-person shooting in this game is simply atrocious.
It's also a welcome improvement that you can simply collect health and power extenders that improve your stats on the spot, rather than having to collect honeycombs or another collectible that you then trade in to extend your health. Again, this streamlines the game to make it simpler. Really, the only thing you have to keep track of are quills and pages, which is a welcome break from the ridiculous number of collectibles in the N64 era Rare titles.
Like Yooka's ability to eat berries, the moves in the game make complete sense with the characters, and are implemented well in their variety of uses. One of the best moves in the game is the reptile roll. This move allows you to go up slopes, similar to Banjo-Kazooie's Talon Trot, but the reptile roll is much faster and a bit more unwieldy than the Talon Trot, giving it enough variation to distinguish itself from the previous game, while also giving a high-risk, high-reward scenario.
The stamina meter also works well with moves like the reptile roll and also the sonar shield, because it takes potentially game-breaking moves and gives them a time limit. This also limits Laylee's flappy flight move on its own, eliminating the need for feathers like in Banjo-Kazooie. Overall, Yooka Laylee limits the numbers of collectibles, making the game easier to play and also the moves easier to utilize without having to worry about having enough eggs or feathers in order to use them. While not vastly different from rare games of the past, I actually found the music to be quite charming and fitting for the game. I was a little nervous because Grant Kirkhope and David Wise made music for Yooka Laylee, but it wasn't as disjointed as I thought it would be. While I was disappointed that there was not, yet, a fully orchestrated score as promised, the music overall is fun and recalls the great rare music of the past, which is nothing to complain about.
Most of the main characters, like Trowser, Kartos, and Yooka Laylee themselves, seem to be fully developed, even if they tend to imitate previous rare characters. These characters have distinct personalities and traits, making them at least passable additions to the game. I also really enjoyed Yooka Laylee's version of Stop and Swap. This time around you search for skulls hidden in random and hard-to-reach places in the 5 worlds. I liked how none of the characters talk about them, and they have a lot of mystery surrounding them, since no one has really figured out what they do yet. And there's still the mystery surrounding the toy box secret that you find in Galleon Galaxy. These might link up to future games or some kind of DLC, which is very exciting.
But to me, the toy box secret and the crystal skulls just feel like yet another reference to Banjo-Kazooie that doesn't turn out to benefit the game at all. We mentioned earlier how one of Yooka Laylee's biggest flaws is its adherence to the formulas used in Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie. And this bland reference to Stop and Swap perfectly shows how Yooka Laylee expects players to just like something because it was featured in those previous games, even if they're needlessly frustrating or flat out useless.
Another reference to previous rare games that is just abysmal is Rextro's Arcade. Again, an interesting idea, but it is implemented so poorly, it's amazing how it ever made it in. So terrible, it has to be compared unfavorably to Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, which featured a charming and humorous retro series of minigames. These games are not retro. 8 and 16-bit inspired music plays, but it's merely a charade. These games all use existing assets with no variation or flair. The controls are often extremely stiff, and the game requires precise movement to get the high score pages. I was expecting Sabermen or Battletoads inspired challenges from the build-up and the music, but what you get is inspired from the worst games on the App Store. They are frustrating and not fun, they are lazy and not creative.
I would rather have played Beaver Bother from Donkey Kong 64 twice every level than do this ever again. At least that game used original assets in its minigames, and tried to be a little more creative with them. These games are by far the worst aspect of Yooka Laylee, and while it could be avoided on an average run, someone trying to 100% it would be longing for the days of Canary Mary. The minigames in the N64 rare games play better than these. That's not acceptable.
The minecarting sections in this game also play far worse than their older counterparts. In the Donkey Kong Country series, you simply have to survive minecart rides to the end, but in Yooka Laylee, you have to collect gems, and this turns a potentially fun section of the game into a complete slog. The main challenge of this section isn't the difficulty of the tracks, but the stiff and delayed controls of the sections. The minecarting in Yooka Laylee is so exceptionally worse than those in any of the Donkey Kong titles that it's embarrassing.
Yooka Laylee also brings in transformations, but almost none of them are as fun or utilized as effectively as those in Banjo-Kazooie or Tooie. Dr. Puzz, a generic and boring cephalopod, transforms you into a flower, snowplow, school of fish, helicopter, and pirate ship. Most of these transformations only get 1 or 2 pages, and almost none of them are fun or even simple to control.
The flower does nothing but get you 1 pagey and needless hints. The snowplow gets you 1 pagey for a pointlessly long quest finding snowman's hats. The school of fish are fun to control but get limited use. And it's fun to shoot things with the helicopter, but it's used to find far too many coins in the casino. The only transformation that adds any sort of variety or uniqueness to the game is the pirate ship, which allows you to shoot meteors of different types. But again, use of the ship seems extremely limited as you can only go in the water with it. The most successful transformations in Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie are able to be used for a large variety of things. For example, the B in both games can be used for particular side quests, but also to attack enemies and find particular jiggies that were easier to do as the B than Banjo. Here, the transformations are lazy and again, draw needless comparison to previous Rare titles, while doing it even worse.
But possibly the worst offender of blind nostalgia is Dr. Quack's Quickfire Quiz. This quiz obviously references both Grunty's Furnace Fun from Banjo-Kazooie and the Tower of Tragedy quiz from Banjo-Tooie. These two game shows work well because they occur at the end of the game, and serve as a cute but challenging recap of the game up to that point. And both use unique ways, a board game and Jeopardy-style competition, to make these quizzes memorable. So, Yooka Laylee couldn't have possibly messed this up, right? All you had to do was put a multiple choice quiz in a unique format at the end of the game. Really simple, right?
And yet, Yooka Laylee somehow manages to screw up even this simple task. Dr. Quack's Quickfire Quiz occurs 3 times throughout the game, one of which is right after the first level. There has barely been enough time to establish the basic concepts of the game before they start the first quiz. This takes out all of the surprise and nostalgia of Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie quizzes, because those quizzes had loads of materials to use when constructing these tests. The Quickfire Quiz takes away all suspense and fun by tasking the gamer with multiple quizzes at points that don't make sense.
Yet another holdover from Banjo-Tooie was the use of bosses in each level. Now, the quality of bosses in Banjo-Tooie varied wildly, from the absolutely horrific Target Zan to the fun and invigorating Weldar. But almost none of the bosses in Yooka Laylee are enjoyable in the slightest.
The Great Rampo is an interesting idea, but the main challenge comes from the slippery controls of the reptile roll rather than the boss itself. Breeze Block is fine, but having 2 wall-based bosses in a row seems lazy. Trev the Tentacle is the most exciting of the bosses, mostly because he actually utilizes all 3 dimensions when attacking and actually interacts with Yooka Laylee completely in the battlefield. The boss Inept could have been fun, but the stiff controls of the minecart sections make this boss fight a chore. Planette is a fun design, but again, you're just shooting at another wall like Breeze Block or Rampo. The lack of variety makes these boring boss fights even more tedious.
The capital B boss fight is fine. It's essentially the same as Grunty's fight with a little less spectacle. Capital B has been taunting you all game in the same exact way that Grunty did in Banjo-Kazooie, meaning the game itself is inviting comparison, which just makes this mediocre boss fight even worse. Think about Banjo-Tooie. It was completely different from the Gruntilda fight in Banjo-Kazooie. Not as good, but they knew they couldn't really top it, so they went in their own direction. Even farther out is Donkey Kong 64, where the final boss is arguably the best part of the game, making it an all-out gauntlet using every character and almost all skills with an out-of-left-field boxing motif. Taking on its own, Capital B's fight is fine, albeit a little easy, but when you compare it to the others, which the game, again, intends you to do, then it's a disappointment.
Also, the character of Capital B is just not as inventive or fun as Gruntilda. Again, the game wants you to make this comparison, which again makes it even worse. He's an alright villain, but the story makes absolutely no sense. Why can this book rewrite the world? Why does it matter whether or not he has the pages? We don't need a novel-length story, but at least Banjo-Kazooie had clear plot and characters. Capital B is not as menacing, funny, or intelligent as Grunty, because the game only shows him as being a cog in the corporate machine. And that's fine if that's what they want the character to be, but it doesn't make for a good final boss.
In fact, a lot of the characters in Yooka Laylee fail to be memorable at all, especially the horrific NPCs in the 5 worlds. Each world have a species of NPC that repeats itself throughout, with bare minimum visual and personality variations. The snowmen are not memorable. The shopping carts are not memorable. The slot machines are not memorable. These characters are just lazy, lazy, lazy. These characters were made with absolutely none of the charm or even personality that was possible.
Going even further so, the few NPCs that are not recycled multiple times per level are cut and pasted into further levels multiple times. The pig knights are used for an interesting and challenging search for areas and clues in Tribal Stack Tropics. They are then used later in Capital Casino to be flown around in a helicopter, as something that could be easily done by another original NPC. They are used again in Galleon Galaxy in conjunction with Shovel Knight, who is also recycled from Tribal Stack Tropics, and have absolutely no logical or even comically illogical connection.
These boring characters give me no reason to become invested in the game, so the world themselves have to be pretty exceptional to keep me excited, but again they range from unique to boring, and none of them are home runs.
Tribal Stack Tropics is basic but effective. The concept doesn't attempt to innovate or try anything that hasn't already been done a million times, but it's not terrible. It's kind of lazy and safe, but at least the layout lends itself pretty well to a first level. There's enough landmarks to know where you are, and the geography is laid out easily enough so you can go from challenge to challenge, keeping the pace up. The verticality of the level also mixes things up a little. Not much, but a little. There's not much to be said other than it's passable.
But Glitter Glaze Glacier does not get the same pass. The color palette and music are nice, but everything else is just weak. The level is confusing to navigate, and everything, minus the castle, looks the same. There are many entrances and exits that don't make sense spatially, and it really disturbs the flow of the world. For example, one doorway in the center of the world leads to the igloo portion of the world, even though the doors aren't anywhere close to one another. Yet again, it shows that the game is sometimes sloppily made, since the developers are okay with letting illogical level design into it.
The third world, Moody Maze Marsh, feels like a Banjo-Kazooie level in the best and worst ways. The world is rather simple, well laid out, and cohesive. There are no real complaints here, but no real compliments either. A Halloween swamp level is a little more creative than a tribal and ice world, but similar levels have been done in Banjo-Kazooie, arguably better. The addition of the Buddy Bubble allows for some fun and unique water puzzles in the level, but the lack of distinction between regular water and swamp water can get confusing.
We have finally come to this point. We need to talk about Capital Casino. Wonderful concept, but the worst world in execution. While a select few pages are earned performing casino-themed minigames, the majority of pages come from earning tokens to be traded in. This adds yet another collectible that bogs down the pace of the game. Plus, the majority of tokens are earned as a helicopter transporting pigs and blowing up slot machines. Where are the card games? Where's the Magician's Act? This level had so many missed opportunities.
Design-wise, the world is literally one giant rectangle and is purposely built really wide and open to justify the helicopter transformation, which makes foot travel a pain. This disrupts the flow of the level, as almost everything you do occurs on the outside parameter of the world, making it feel extremely empty and boring when you travel the middle of the level. The horrible level design calls back to Clanker's Cavern, a Banjo-Kazooie reference the game should never try to imitate.
Surprisingly, the fifth and final world in the game, Galleon Galaxy, actually functions the best out of all the worlds. Although Space Pirates was already done in the beloved classic Treasure Planet, it's still a pretty original concept for a platformer. The world can be a little disjointed, but the space theme allows the level to be somewhat illogical in design, similar to how Cloud Cuckooland's theme made the manic design make sense. The pirate ship controls can be a bit iffy, but this transformation interacts with the world in the most meaningful way. The only real complaint for Galleon Galaxy are those reused NPCs.
But ultimately, what makes all these worlds worse is the world expansion mechanic. While the idea of expanding a world is a cool and unique concept in theory, it merely makes all the worlds seem unfinished when you first arrive there. So you get a half-complete world that's all too obvious where the parts are missing, and then when you expand it, you get what you should have had to begin with. In Tribal Stack Tropics, there are certain roads you can go down that obviously lead to incomplete portions of the world, and the ability to see where these expansions will show up really take away from any surprise factor that could have come from these expansions.
Yooka Laylee's expansion mechanic could have benefited by expanding the worlds in more interesting or wonky ways, such as accidentally causing the sun to shine in Glitterglaze Glacier, which ends up melting some snow and revealing paths. But the additions are really just uninspired add-ons to already established routes in the world. The only expansion that's slightly interesting is the one in Glitterglaze Glacier, which opens up an isometrically designed palace. This expansion works because it brings something completely new and original to the level.
In addition, each of the world's theming lacks follow-through in terms of characters and challenges. What do pig nights have to do with a jungle world, or a casino world, or space world for that matter? The skeleton girl made sense in the jungle, but not in the ice or swamp worlds. Think about Pterodactyl Land's theming. You get 2 different dinosaur enemies, a Stegosaurus and a pterodactyl. You get 3 separate tribes of several different cavemen. You get several enormous dinosaur characters of varying species, a swamp monster, a Triceratops family, and a large pterodactyl family. You get it, it's a prehistoric theme. Well, what do you get in the glacier? 7 identical snowmen, a skeleton woman, a hot tub, a sign, and an ice wall. In the space world, you get the pig knights, some frog people, a space girl, Shovel Knight, and a cloud that they brought back from the first world, and a sentient moon. The weird assortment of characters in each world takes away from the theme by not keeping it consistent.
Likewise, many of the challenges simply make no sense with the worlds either. For example, every single world has a platforming challenge where you have to fly through rings, even though these platforming sections actually have no connection to anything that's happening in the world. Why is there a minecart level in every world when none of them have mines? Why is Rextro in every single world when only one of them associate with retro gaming at all? These repetitive challenges make no sense in the game and become extremely boring and cumbersome.
The best platformers utilize characters and challenges together to extend the theme to every possible nook and cranny, making a world come alive. For example, in Banjo-Tooie, you have to rescue a canary trapped in Glitter Gulch Mine. Now this makes sense because canaries have been used in mines to warn miners when they come upon toxic gas. Here, none of the character challenges make sense. Why are frogs running a star fishing challenge, a larger-than-life golf course, and a strength test? It just does not make sense, and the game plays them off as completely normal. Unfortunately, none of the worlds in the game incorporate the pages with the characters to make a fully fleshed out world.
And just like all of the main worlds, the hub world suffers from a lack of cohesive identity. Why is part of the hub world underwater? Why is part of it out in open air? If you want it to be a business or a factory motif, construct it like a workplace or a factory. Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie's hub worlds didn't make much sense, but because they were a lair and the open world, they got away with it.
Ivory Towers also lacks that feeling of exploration that previous games like Banjo-Kazooie had. It's very linear and doesn't have any cool secrets or things to discover other than pages. Overall, this is a problem, and it feels like everything in the game is only there because it has to be, leaving little room for genuine surprises or supplementary discoveries, like Brintilda and Banjo-Kazooie. There's no cheat codes, there's no ice key, well, kind of. There's no goldfish to teach you better swimming, no little experimentations like having Wumba dislike Mumbo and yell at him to leave her pool, no cameos or Easter eggs or anything like that. Besides the skulls, there are no attempts to build up an interesting and surprising world.
And while we may appear to be nitpicking Yooka Laylee, we're doing so because the basis of a game is there. The game uses collectibles really well, and it works as a platformer, but the lack of polish in the game really brings it down. And in an era of a plethora of games, you can no longer excuse having an unpolished release.
First, there are no channel fades in the hub world. Now, a channel fade occurs when the theme of the hub world changes to imitate the instrumentation and musical style of a level when you get close to it. For example, if you approach Moody Maze Marsh, the hub music should shift. This is a standard in almost all rare platformers, and there's no excuse for not having these channel fades.
Now, as long as we're talking about music, Yooka Laylee doesn't have any pause menu music. Again, this could be a relatively quick and easy fix, And even though Playtonic is adding that music to the game eventually, it still shows that the company was comfortable enough to release the game without menu music, which is also a standard in all games at this point. Also, Playtonic promised an orchestrated soundtrack for the release, which ultimately ended up not happening. Regardless of how a game is funded, the company should not make promises it can't keep, such as No Man's Sky.
Does the game world make BioShock Infinite look less infinite by comparison? Yes.
Even though these features were promised in updates for the game, Playtonic was comfortable enough to release the game without any of these promised features. It doesn't matter if you release a bad game and then realize it's bad, so you add more to it. You can't patch things in any other medium, so there's absolutely no excuse for a bad release of video games either.
In addition, it's lacking a lot of other small touches. There's no push animation when Yooka Laylee moves blocks or balls, and that's something that even Conker's Bad Fur Day had. The enemies lack variety, and most of them are just variations of the main baddies you see in the lair. These enemies also don't have a unique death sound, as many of the baddies did in the previous platformers. And finally, the game's loading screens are ridiculous, especially when navigating the hub world. I understand that Yooka Laylee pokes fun at these loading screens, but it doesn't make up for the fact that they are far too long and far too numerous for a game of this length.
And the self-referential humor in the game is one of its worst parts. And that humor is what Yooka Laylee uses to compare the game to Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie, two games which is vastly inferior to it. The jokes about the corporate machinations that clearly reference Microsoft are kind of funny, but the joke gets old after a while, and they soon come across as just bitter. The references to Banjo-Kazooie levels only serve to remind gamers of a better game. So, we just have one simple question. Why do you make fun of what your game does when you can just change those things? If you want to make fun of collectibles, then don't use collectibles. These jokes just point to how lazy the genre can become and how lazy Yooka Laylee is. These are cheap gimmicks that might have been funny during the prime of the 3D platformer 17 years ago, but now they come off as just sad and dated.
And really, this is what brings down Yooka Laylee, an obsession with the past. It wants to be Banjo so badly that it ultimately hurts the game. It constantly reminds you of better executed ideas and concepts by inviting constant, unfavorable comparisons with not Spiral Mountain, not Gruntilda, not Gruntilda's Lair, not Grunty's Furnace Fun. You get it. It points to games that did the same thing 20 years ago and better. It's an admirable effort, but needed more time in the oven to polish. This is not the end of Playtonic. I think they can survive this. It's not really a failure, more so a disappointment. It's clear that they will need to either separate themselves further from who they used to be and create their own identity, or go the extra mile and not only match the quality of classic Rare games, but evolve it in a fresh and modern way.
Yooka Laylee recalls too much to what used to be that it fails to achieve characters, settings, and ideas that are fresh and unique to the game. It is, for better and worse, a throwback to a gaming era of the past. Ultimately, what hurts it most is that it spends so much time reminding gamers of other games that execute many of the same ideas and concepts better. It's by no means the end of Playtonic, but the game feels dated the moment that it starts.
So that's our final verdict on Yooka Laylee. What did you think? Did we get the facts wrong?
Did it rely too much on the past? Did it just need a couple of more months to polish up? Let us know in the comments what your case is.
And thanks again for joining us on this exciting new season of The Game Detectives.